And we should be recording now, Barb. So I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Robin. We'll start just by having a quick look at the agenda on the next slide. Robin's going to operate the slides from Minden as I'm sitting here in North Bay. So we have a lot of Northern Ontario people on the line today, so it's great to see and hear you all, even if you're not in Northern Ontario. The information that we're going to share with you today is not our information. It's really just a compilation of the ministry's historical and slightly more recent information about the OALCF. So most of the content that we're sharing with you is drawn from various documents that the ministry has produced over the years related to LBS delivery and the OALCF. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the OALCF, where it came from, about the curriculum framework itself, about the complexity levels within the framework, to clarify that a little bit, and then some discussion actually about milestone development and administration, and then culminating task development and administration. As Robin said, we'll try to answer questions as we go along. If you'd like to put them in the chat or raise your hand, Robin and I will co-monitor the chat and the raised hands to address things as we go along. And then we'll certainly allow some time at the end for questions. We are repeating this training again on Thursday, tomorrow, and then again in early September. So if you have colleagues that are wanting to listen to this, if they're working on the development project especially, then you'll be able to access either the recording, or they could sign up for the September training if they're not able to come this week, if they'd like to actually hear it the third time around that Robin and I are doing this. And Robin will, as she said earlier, take you through the website that has this information posted and registration links for the trainings and so on. So there's a couple of little quotes on the agenda page that I think are pretty relevant, not only to us today, but to our learners too. I like the value of an idea lies in the using of it. That's kind of a cool quote, I think. So anyway, we'll get started. And Robin will go to the next slide here. We would like to acknowledge today that we are on various lands of our Indigenous peoples today across the province. And even though we are meeting on a virtual platform, we do want to take some time at this point to acknowledge the importance of the lands which each of us calls home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we clearly acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And I see Robin has uploaded the presentation to the chat, just in case you'd like to follow along or save it for yourself anytime today while we're online. So as I mentioned, we'll start with a bit of history about an overview of where the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework originally came from. LBS itself was created back in 1996-97. It was launched at that time. The previous program to LBS, some of you oldies like me and Robin would remember, was called Ontario Basic Skills. And then the ministry updated that program and it became Literacy and Basic Skills. And then starting in around 2007, the ministry started their development project around the OALCF. And so it was, as the slide says, part of the 2007 Ontario plan from the Ontario government at the time, which stated that Ontario would work together with the college sector and nonprofit groups to design and develop an adult literacy curriculum framework. So it was a course of time, obviously, to do this work, starting in 2008-09, second phase in 9-10, and the final development phase in 2011. And then in the 2011-12 fiscal year, that's when the OALCF was launched, and the current performance management framework that we all work under in LBS was launched at the same time. And we started using EOIS CAMs at the same time. So a lot happened in 2011-12 in terms of what we as service providers were required to do to work with the OALCF and to work with EOIS CAMs and the performance measures that we still have today. If we fast forward a little bit to the fall of 2021, the ministry provided funding to the support organizations and the literacy networks to develop some new milestones and culminating tasks, and to review and update some of the original milestones and culminating tasks that were either out of date due to their content, or maybe had an error or two in them that needed to be corrected. So that was a lot of work that went on, and some of you were involved in that for sure back in the 21-22 year. And those new milestones and culminating tasks are now available on the OALCF portal. It's always important, I think, when we talk about the OALCF or talk about LBS in general, to just revisit the scope of the delivery that we provide in LBS. LBS is funded and delivered under 4 cultural streams. So all of us as service providers are contracted under one of 4 cultural streams, either Anglophone, Deaf, Francophone, or Indigenous. And it doesn't mean you can only serve learners in those streams, but the funding and the contracts that we have with the ministry are attached to one of those cultural streams. And our programming is obviously customized for those streams as well. We also have in common that there are 5 goal paths in the LBS program, and when we bring a learner in, we help them to decide which goal path of those 5 that makes sense for them, whether it's employment, pursuing post-secondary education, pursuing apprenticeship, getting ready for secondary school credit, or the independence pathway. Pardon me, because I'm probably going to sneeze a couple of times. I have some seasonal allergies that seem to be kicking in this morning more than other days. And finally, we all have in common that we are delivering goal-oriented program. We're trying to help our learners to establish short-term goals, long-term goals, and progress toward those goals by developing skills with us and applying those skills to achieving their goals. There's a little quote on the left from the LBS guidelines. As an overview, the Literacy and Basic Skills program helps adults develop and apply communication, numeracy, and digital skills to achieve their goals. Don't see any questions yet, so we can carry on. And Robin and I may jump in, tag teaming on some different slides if we need to. So don't worry if that happens. It's all good. So as we were saying earlier, once the Literacy and Basic Skills program had been running for several years, the ministry embarked on the OALCF project to actually strengthen and support LBS programming in Ontario, and to provide a little more consistency in the way we talk about the competency of our learners and the way that they are progressing toward their goals. So when we talk about OALCF, there's a lot of moving or not so moving parts. There's actually a lot of fairly static parts. So this slide just illustrates some of the different pieces of the OALCF. And as it says up in the top right, the purpose is to improve our learners' ability to transition through the Employment Ontario programming into other education and training opportunities and/or employment. So the framework consists of a number of different parts. It consists of some tools and documentation to strengthen what we are delivering in LBS. It provides a foundation for setting up our learner plans, and it also provides a foundation to reporting back to the ministry. It is a learner-centered program. LBS has always been a learner-centered program. We're looking to, we're trying to really focus on what learners need, provide programming that's going to support them, provide other supports like training supports and so on that they need, and help those learners to move and progress toward their ultimate goal or even a shorter term goal. We talked about goal-directed programming on the previous slide. Transition-oriented refers to the fact that at the end of their LBS program, in theory, if they're ready, the learner would transition into the next step on their goal path. So, for example, if they're on the employment path, then, if all goes well for them and they are basically finished their LBS program, then they would be ready to transition to job search and employment. If they're on the secondary school credit path, for example, then at the end of their LBS programming, they would hopefully be ready to transition into secondary school credit programming at a school board, and so on. And then to support that learning, we also are looking at a task-based learning approach where some of, not necessarily all, but at least some of the materials we provide to students as their learning activities, courses, however we package them or call them, that are going to provide some authentic tasks or situations where the learners are using that learning to enhance the progress toward their final goal. And so that's what we mean by a task-based learning approach. And then, of course, milestones and culminating tasks are more formal examples of tasks that a learner might be doing while in our program that relate to their longer-term goals. And so, again, at the bottom, and a sort of a blanket statement, the OALCF is a very broad term, refers to all the features of delivering a competency-based program. We'll talk about the competencies shortly. But I do want to stress that the OALCF itself is not a curriculum. It's a very large, high-level, overarching set of competencies and indicators of performance and indicators of features of the tasks. It is not a curriculum. There was a lot of confusion about that when this was implemented back in 2011-12. So any curriculum can be mapped back to the competencies and task groups in the OALCF, but the OALCF itself is not a curriculum. It's a curriculum framework, an assessment framework, a competency framework, a number of words could describe it. So that's always an important point to clarify near the beginning. You might have seen this document at some point. The image that's on the right. The curriculum framework is the core of the OALCF. It describes the competencies and task groups that make up that large OALCF curriculum framework. It was originally produced and released in 2012 or 2011. You can see the date on it. Well, you might not be able to see the date on it. It's a bit small, but it does say March 2011. And so that was when all of this documentation was released. And it is still available. It's fairly lengthy, so what we're trying to do today is to pull out some pieces of that document so that it's a little bit easier to understand and use it. The curriculum framework was designed to help practitioners, us, who are working directly with learners, to make connections for those learners between literacy and numeracy development, digital skills development, and the actual real life situations and tasks that they're going to be encountering, whether they're in an employment work situation, whether they're in a learning situation, they're going to further training or education after LBS, and just broader community and family contexts. The curriculum framework does provide a common language, and that was one of the ministry's goal, a common language to talk about the criteria for learning, whether, no matter what the goal or the background or the interests of the learners are. So again, I just want to stress that it isn't a curriculum itself. It's a broad framework that provides some common language and criteria, both for working with learners and for reporting back to the ministry. The framework does support the development of the skills and knowledge and behaviors that are required by our learners to achieve their goals. And so those are broadly clustered into competencies within the OALCF. There are 6 competencies, and the competencies are further broken down into task groups. And we'll walk through those today as well. And so again, it's the OALCF is always trying to help us make those connections back to real life and work in the community and in learning situations. And that'll become a little clearer when we walk through some of those competencies and task groups shortly. So at the risk of repeating myself, I'll just say again, the curriculum framework isn't content or specific curricula or content that you have to use. It doesn't contain objectives or learning outcomes. It contains broad indicators of performance. And any curriculum can be mapped back to the OALCF. So we as providers, we select the curricula and content that meets the needs of the learners. And that's hugely varied across LBS programs. There isn't an LBS curriculum. We all have the freedom to choose the curriculum, the content, the learning activities that best support the needs of our learners. And in some cases, there are, for example, in the deaf stream, there's probably a little more commonality of some of the curricula that they use. But there's no set curricula that we have to use. We just have to be able to associate it with the competencies and task groups in the OALCF. So I'm just going to finish up my first part of the presentation here and pass things over to Robin in a moment, and she'll talk in a little bit more detail. The 6 broad competencies that organize our learning content within LBS are the following that you see on the slide. Competency A is find and use information. Competency B, communicate ideas and information. Competency C, understand and use numbers. D, use digital technology. E, manage learning. And competency F, engage with others. Each of those competencies is broken down into smaller subgroups called task groups. And if you just take a moment and we kind of look broadly at any one of those competencies, we can actually see how broad they are. Find and use information applies to just about anything that a learner is doing, whether they're preparing for work, learning, and life. Communication is broadly applicable. Understanding and using numbers, maybe not quite as broadly applicable as A and B, but certainly for just even functioning in our world today, we need a pretty good understanding of you understanding and using numbers, and even introductory numeracy, even if we're not pursuing a further training and education, and so on. So with that, I think now, Robin, it's your turn, right? Oh, okay, one more slide for me. So
Actually, three more slides.
Oh, okay. I can't see the number, so I wasn't sure if we were at 17 yet. So the OALCF competencies, we're not kind of just dreamed up by one individual person. They were created based on collaboration and consultation with the LBS field back in the early sort of 2007 to 2009, 10 years. And the question that was asked of our literacy and basic skills service providers at the time was, what is it that our learners in our LBS program should learn? And so then the development team that worked on the OALCF took that information and other information to create the 6 competencies that you saw just a moment ago. And then, of course, it's kind of important to understand why the ministry was advocating a competency-based approach. A competency-based framework, such as the OALCF, is very fulsome, and it's got a lot of room to represent a large range of skills and knowledge and behaviors that are needed and required by our learners in our adult literacy programs. And so it is intentionally broad to help capture the huge scope of programming and the many different learner profiles that we help support in LBS. The second bullet there notes that the competencies are context-free. So they're not competencies specific to employment or specific to further education or specific to, working in in an independent setting. They're very broad generic categories that can be applied broadly to our learners. It's also broad enough in terms of the competencies that are listed to then contextualize the learning to our learners' goals. So we can create programming, as we said, that maps back to the OALCF, but doesn't necessarily have to be the same for each learner. It doesn't have to be the same across all programs, but we can make it relevant to the learner's goals. The competencies are associated with the tasks that we provide. They're associated with the milestones. They're associated with the culminating tasks. And a competency doesn't stand by itself alone. If, for example, learners are developing their communication skills, written, verbal, then they're doing that by way of, they might be doing it through learning numeracy. They might be doing it by learning digital skills. They might be doing it by learning, improving their English and language skills. So the competencies don't stand alone. They overlap and interact with each other. And you might have heard the term generic skills used through the years, but another feature of the OALCF is that concept of competencies does imply a broader application or a broader concept than just that sort of older term that we used to use called generic skills. And Robin, are we at 17?
Not yet, but I can take over if you want, no
You go
problem.
ahead now. Yep.
Okay. So again, just to kind of recap, the point is that the OALCF is really meant to focus on how learners are going to use the skills outside of the actual programming that's being delivered. The goal is always for the learner to transition out of LBS onto their next step. So the focus of the framework itself was to support those transitions. It's a competency-based framework, and within those competencies, it's also task-based. So it's a combination of those two things put together in one framework. The curriculum framework was put together as a tool that should be used to guide the development of the programming that's happening within the different LBS agencies. And again, as Barb said, there isn't a common curriculum. People draw on different curriculum that makes sense to support the learners and the goals within their program. Programs focus on different things. They have different niches. The learners that come to the programs have unique goals. So the curriculum has to be unique to support those goals, but it can be mapped back to the framework itself. The framework was also developed so that it could guide assessment. And we're going to focus a lot on the more what we would consider to be the more standardized pieces of assessment that we use, which are the milestones and the culminating tasks. Those aren't the only assessment tools. Assessment should be done holistically. There's lots of different ways that we assess every day in programming, but the two that are tied to performance management are the milestones and the culminating tasks. So hence the development of more tools to support those two. And of course, instruction. The framework is also just meant to be used to guide everyday instruction in programs. So as Barb already went through, it's organized into 6 sections. There's one for each competency. Each competency section starts with a definition of that competency and any associated task groups within that particular competency. And over the next part of the presentation, I'm really going to walk you through the different components of the curriculum framework itself. So for those of you who know this, this is very much a review, but we have some new people in the room today. So hopefully this will give you some foundation in understanding what's contained in the curriculum framework document and how it's kind of laid out and how the information works in that document. So as I said, it's competency based, and within the competencies, we have task groups. A task group is a collection or category of related tasks that share common characteristics or objectives, and they're grouped together based on their function or area of focus. So the OALCF uses task groups as an organizing feature, and these tasks described within each task group, there are also particular tasks described or specific tasks described, and as examples because there's an infinite number of tasks that a learner can do. But tasks within each task group are meant to be purposeful activities that bundle together the skills and knowledge people are gaining within a program. So task groups organize the content within each of the competencies. They help structure the information and they help make sure that each competency is defined and understood. So the competencies are very broad, but there are limits in what we deliver in literacy and basic skills. So the competencies and the task groups within are meant to give a snapshot kind of what it is that we deliver through literacy and basic skills in the province. Task groups provide a way to explore features of the tasks and performance for the different aspects of the broader competencies. So, when taken together, the task groups describe the full range of content within each competency as it relates specifically to the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework. So, that broad, overreaching framework that we're working with. An important aspect of the task groups is that they have no implied hierarchy. So they appear in the document in an order because it's a document and you have to have it structured a certain way. But that doesn't imply hierarchy. It can be taught or selected in any order depending on what the learner's goals and needs are. So the idea is that this is just a reference document, and you're not working through or trying to match your curriculum up in a linear way. You're meant to use this as the foundation, and the selection is really based on what the learner's needs and goals are. It's a learner-centered program. They come to your program. If they're coming to improve their writing skills, you're not going to focus on numeracy, even though that's in the framework. You're just going to look at writing. And within writing, it might be very particular things that they're working on. When you take them together, the task groups again are meant to address aspects of each competency comprehensively as it relates to what we're delivering through literacy and basic skills. The link they link the broad competencies to program development and hopefully make it easier for the practitioner to understand what a learner can or cannot do within that particular competency and task group. So this is a page from the curriculum framework showing level 1 from the task group read continuous text. And we have some snapshots right out of the framework in this presentation just to help people orient themselves to how the framework is laid out and how it works. So to recap, the task groups are essential for organizing, exploring, and addressing the competencies in a flexible and comprehensive manner. So this is the broader competency, find and use information. Within that, there's a task group, read continuous text. Helps organize the content within the larger competency when necessary. And again, has no implied hierarchy. So those different task groups can be taught in any order depending on what the learner is in the program there for. I'm just going to check questions as we go through. Again, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll try to address them as we're working through the material. I'm going to walk now through each of the competencies and each of the task groups within those competencies, just to give you a little bit more information about what each task group focuses on within each of the broader competencies. So the first is find and use information, competency A, and it's comprised of tasks that involve the different ways learners find and use information in the world. Information sources may be written in sentences or paragraphs, displayed as documents, or produced as films, broadcasts, or presentations. So, broadly speaking, that's what competency A, find and use information, captures. Within that, you have the three different task groups. So, read continuous text captures tasks that are completed to carry out a function like reading a brochure, to learn about community services. It also includes tasks that are ends in themselves, such as reading poetry for pleasure. The next task group, interpret documents. Within interpret documents, the documents refer to material that is organized as non-continuous text, in which information is displayed usually using graphic elements. So documents make use of many different formats and structures. It can include things like lists, tables, forms, maps, diagrams. Many documents, such as websites, because websites are considered documents, and some other forms also do include continuous text. So if a document includes continuous text, they should be examined for those reading requirements as well within task group A. And Barb kind of spoke to this a little bit earlier when she was talking about the six competencies and the task groups. Even within those competencies, they do overlap and they work together. Very rarely are you just doing one thing, because you're usually involving two or more competencies when you're actually executing a task. Um, Tasks can also require the use of electronic documents. And again, this is where use digital technology would kind of play into this. So you have to look at documents in terms of the document itself, but also in terms of the other things that are involved in engaging with that particular document. The third task group in find and use information is extract information from films, broadcasts, and presentations. This includes non-print information sources. And this is, I think, a really important inclusion in the curriculum framework, because it is something that we do on an everyday basis, and something that we do even more than we probably did back in 2011 when this particular framework was put together. But it was put together to try to have some longevity and incorporate things that we knew would become more important as time went on. Examples of tasks are in this particular task group include things like listening to a podcast, a lecture, observing a demonstration. This particular task group, the tasks aren't rated for complexity, because it's very hard to do it and it doesn't really make sense. And they're really appropriate for all learners at all levels to be doing this type of engagement in finding and using information. Okay, and Barb just posted, just in case you don't have a copy of it, the curriculum framework document, which I'm kind of walking through right now to a large extent, where you can actually locate it on EOPG, the direct link to that document. The next big competency is communicate ideas and information, and it involves tasks um, about the different ways that learners communicate. So learners need to be able to express themselves, to share their ideas and information. And this explores both written and verbal modes of communication. Um, Within it, interact with others, which is the first task group, examines the ways that adults come together to exchange information, share opinions, explain things, discuss things. These tasks are different or distinct from those in the final competency, which I'll talk about in a bit, engage with others. Engage with others is primarily about achieving shared goals and outcomes. But interacting with others is really about the ways people share information with each other, using opinion, presenting information, explaining things, that type of thing. So there is a distinction between those two. And it's important to keep that in mind as you're working with this framework. The task group Write Continuous Text focuses on writing sentences and paragraphs and can involve both paper-based and computer-generated text. Um, it can also include entering sentences and paragraphs into documents. So it's important again to look at writing continuous text if you're using forms. You're also looking at the task group Complete and Create Documents, which is within this particular competency. Writing that's intended as self-expression, such as writing poetry, making journal entries, those types of things are actually captured within the final task group in this particular competency, express oneself creatively. Complete and create documents refer to material that's organized as non-continuous text and which is used or displayed using graphic elements. Documents are come in very many different forms and structures. It can include lists, tables, forms, diagrams, maps. Um, and completing documents is kind of the other part of this particular task group where you're actually filling in documents. Express oneself creatively is meant to encompass both print and non-print communication that is intended as a means of self-expression. So examples might include maintaining a personal blog or a journal, creating a collage to depict personal goals, or sharing stories and poetry. Again, in this particular task group, the tasks aren't rated for complexity because personal and creative expression is appropriate for learners at all levels. So it's not rated against a complexity level. It's just in, captured in the framework because it's also an important means of communication for adults. So it was important to have a place for this in the framework. Understand and use numbers involves tasks that obviously involve working with numbers in a variety of contexts. Um, they're very realistic task groups within this. And it only goes to a certain point, understand and use numbers. So it's really quite foundational in terms of what we actually deliver through literacy and basic skills. Manage money covers the numeracy skills that are required for basically financial transactions, comparing prices, calculating costs, making budgets, those real life types of things. Managing time is all about, understanding time management, that type of thing. Reading clocks, comparing time preparing schedules. Um, Time management is actually captured within understand the competency, understand and use numbers, but it's also captured in the managed learning competency to a certain extent. So again, there's some crossover between those two. Use measures is all about measurement, how we use measurement. It's about thermometers and common tools like tape measures. It's about using basic geometry. So, calculating area and volume, those types of things where you use measurement in real life situations, whether it be in your home or in the workplace or in foundational educational places. And what's important to remember about this particular competency is that many numeracy tasks do require the use of documents. Again, there's crossover. So you might need to look at read continuous text, and you might need to also look at interpret documents when you're looking at tasks that involve understanding and using numbers. Just checking chat. Use digital technology explores tasks that require meaningful interactions with the digital component of a device. So, digital technology tasks usually require users to make one or more choices as they're completing a task. It might be things like changing settings, using a digital interface to create something. It could be sending text messages using a smartphone, or using computers to make a document. It also includes actually interacting with on the internet to find information. Use digital technology is a bit unique in terms of its organization because it's not organized by task groups. Use digital technology is the competency, and basically it's also the task group because the factors that drive the complexity are consistent across tasks. And the full range and dimensions of the tasks are captured within the competency as a whole. So it's a little bit different than the first three competencies. Managed learning is meant to capture the elements that contribute to successful learning. It's about goal setting, planning, learning strategies, self reflection, and evaluation as it relates back to the learning process. It's also not organized by task groups, but it does have performance descriptors, which are observable characteristics of learner performance. Some performance descriptors are organized by levels, while others apply to tasks across the levels. Performance descriptors organized by levels describe three different aspects of learner performance. So it's a little different. The last three competencies are a little different than the first three competencies and how they're organized. And the final competency is engage with others. And it is really resting upon a series of interactions and collaborations between individuals extended over a period of time. They call upon communication skills, soft skills, interpersonal skills, and it's about establishing and maintaining relationships with the ultimate goal of achieving a shared outcome. This competency differs from interact with others, which really focuses more on single exchanges. So, not exchanges that are extended over a period of time with a shared goal or outcome. Okay, so Kaylin has asked a question. When you're speaking about tasks being completed in whichever order, you're referring to doing competency B2, B1, B4. Or so by competent within the competency of the task groups. Yeah, the different task groups. It's not related to levels. Yes. So what I'm saying, you're going to work with a learner based on whatever their goals are. So you're going to be looking at groups that are specific to their goals. Within the task groups, some of the task groups are leveled, and I'll get into that in a little bit as we work through this. So you're going to want to establish the level at which the learner is working in terms of the tasks that they're completing. So within certain task groups, there are three levels. So yes, I'm talking about it's kind of, you would also have to determine at which level a learner's working at, but you don't have to work sequentially through the task groups within the competencies. It's not meant for that purpose. Sorry. Okay, great.
Robin, can I just add one little thing there?
Yep.
There's no expectation that a learner is going to go through all of the competencies and all of the task groups. We to use a slang kind of term, we cherry pick the competencies and task groups that the learner needs to work with in order to move toward their goal. So there's no expectation that every learner in any possible way is going to work through all the competencies, all the task groups, and all the levels.
Correct. Yeah, and the levels was I was just going to add, and the
Yeah.
levels. So a learner might not require it to be working at the end of level 3 to transition to whatever it is they need to do. Not every learner needs to, some learners come in, they need to build some foundational skills, and they show that they can do what they need to do at the end of level 1, or it might even be mid-level 1, and then they can move on. So it's really based on the learner. And it really highlights the fact that this is not a curriculum, it's a curriculum framework against which you can map what you're doing. Okay, so again, with engagement with others, the tasks in this competency are not rated for complexity. There are performance descriptors, and the performance descriptors can be used to help identify abilities learners have and those that they need to develop for successful transition. The performance descriptors are set up in such a way that learners are able to use it as a self-assessment. So again, a really important part of the framework, something that was important when it was developed to capture as a piece that people do use LBS for. Like they gain these types of skills within LBS, but it's hard to put them against a level. Like there are things that they're a little less tangible almost, but definitely captured within the framework. Okay, so moving on, I'm back to that screenshot that I shared before, and within each competency and then within each task group where there is a task group, you're going to see something called an indicator, what is actually called an indicator statement. And this indicator statement at each level in the task group are meant to describe the achievement at the end of the level. They're really just a snapshot of programming, what the programming focuses at that level. So in this case, for find and use information, read continuous text. At the end of level 1, learners can read brief text to locate specific details. That doesn't give you all of the descriptors. It just gives you, like I said, a snapshot. And it's a place to start to get a sense of where you're going in the framework if you're using it to support whatever it is that you're developing. So within the framework as well, just for those of you who aren't familiar with it or are new to LBS, the competencies of task groups and indicators are coded. So there's a coding system used. They're also color coded. Each competency has its own distinct color, but they have a coding system that was put into place. So for example, A1.1 means it's find and use information, which is competency A. It's read continuous text, which is task group 1, and it's read brief text to locate specific details, which is equivalent to the indicator or level 1. So A is the competency, 1 is the task group, and the point 1 is the level we're talking about within the framework. This is a snapshot. I know you can't read the actual text on it, but just so that you can see that it's there. This is a snapshot that of the page 6. What is page 6 of the curriculum framework document? And it gives you a one-page overview of all the competencies, task groups, and indicator statements. It's a really great tool to use as a starting point when you're leveling a task. And we're not going to get into leveling tasks today. That's the next big one of the other components of training. The developing leveling of tasks will be discussed in much more detail during the task-based training session. So this is one of the trainings. The task-based training is another. And then the third training that we're offering is a clear writing training. But this is a great tool to have. I actually have this posted in my office all the time on the wall because it's just a great reference point for me when I'm working on curriculum, when I'm looking at reviewing milestones or culminating tasks. I start here and then I go into more detail within the framework document itself if I need to. As Barb mentioned, it's a pretty lengthy document. I think it's 64 pages long, so it's got a lot in it. It is laid out, in a very, I think, easy to digest format, but this is kind of the go-to page to start out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about descriptors now. Um, and there are two main types of descriptors. There are performance descriptors, and then there are task descriptors. Performance descriptors and task descriptors provide detailed information about the qualities of the tasks and the performance at a given level. So they're laid out to help set clear expectations and standards. The descriptors work in combination with each other to foster a comprehensive understanding of task complexity at a given level. So you can't just look at the performance descriptors or the task descriptors where both exist. You have to read them as a whole to get a very broad sense of that particular level. Typically, descriptors are unique to a level, which means they're tailored to the specific requirements and expectations of that level. However, some descriptors may apply to more than one level, so they cross levels, and that's why it's important to look at them holistically as a group. You can't just pick off one particular descriptor and say, oh, that means it's level one. You have to look at all of them to make a determination around whether or not something is a level one task, for example. Having said that, it's also not a science. So there is some level of practitioner expertise and familiarity needed when you're working with a framework document. A framework is never going to have every single thing that you need in it, but it's meant to give you as much as possible to give you the foundation to make those decisions when you're looking at development. So the descriptors describe the qualities of learner performance and of the tasks at that given level. They're meant to foster an understanding of task complexity. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're going to do a brief introduction around task complexity, but again, that will be dealt with in much more detail during the task-based training. The descriptors are really meant to give an understanding of the complexity. They're typically unique to a level, but again, as I mentioned, sometimes they apply to more than one level. So particular descriptor you might see it in both level one and level two, but it's not just that one descriptor that's describing the level, it's all of them together. Um, Performance descriptors are observable characteristics of learner performance. So they're really about what the learner does. And that's why they start with the phrase the learner. Task descriptors describe the quality of the tasks that they're working on. So they're two different types of descriptors that work together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the performance descriptors first. So they're the expected features of a learner's performance at the end of a given level. So keep in mind the framework document itself is meant to represent the end of each of the levels. And they're observable characteristics of what a learner can do. So in this example, I'm not going to read them all, but for example, the learner at the end of level one, when they're reading continuous text, they're able to decode words and make meaning of sentences. They're able to identify the main idea in brief text. So this just gives you kind of a snapshot. And Deb just posted a really great poster with all the without milestones included. It's kind of an overview poster of the the curriculum framework itself. That's a great resource to have as well. I also have that stuck on my wall in my office. Okay. So as learners perform increasingly complex tasks, they can do things like make inferences to determine task requirements, apply their background knowledge and experience to carry out things that aren't familiar to them. They can manage tasks with unfamiliar elements. They can identify different ways to complete tasks. They can find, integrate, and analyze information, and they might even experiment and problem solve to achieve their results. So as they can do more complex tasks, the things they can do in terms of performance become more complex as well. The task descriptors, so on the other side, really describe the qualities of the task, the thing that the learner is going to do. And they describe the features of the tasks at the end of a given level. So again, for example, the task descriptors at level one for read continuous text, it describes basically the text. It's the scope is limited. It involves only one text. It's only a paragraph long. it has a highly explicit purpose. So it gives you kind of the parameters of what the task itself will involve. Tasks become more complex when they're not as well defined, when they require more steps, when they can be completed in more than one way, especially if they don't have a set procedure to do them. If they have unfamiliar elements such as unfamiliar context or vocabulary, and they involve multiple and or complex documents and texts. So as tasks become more complex, the things around these different things usually appear within the tasks themselves. Just to really reiterate this, it's really important that the performance descriptors and task descriptors are used together to understand what a learner can do at each level. Um, you can't just look at one descriptor and say, okay, this must be a level one because this exists. You really have to read it holistically. Hopefully, there is enough information for you to make a decision. Sometimes it might be hard, and that's where you can draw on. I always encourage people to work in teams and draw on the expertise of the other practitioners. And a lot of people are taking a team approach to the development of the culminating tasks and milestones. Um, the last main component of each descriptive page or page for each competency task group level are the example tasks. And they're exactly that. They're meant to give you examples of what learners can do at the end of a level. They indicate the goal paths in which learners are likely to be expected to perform similar tasks once they've transitioned. And again, this is there's like a dot chart included, and it includes the 5 goal paths: independence, employment, secondary schools, credit, post-secondary, and apprenticeship. So they're meant to, it's a guideline though. Sometimes we find that there's a milestone and it might have been developed primarily for independence and employment, but it might also have applicability if someone is on the apprenticeship or skills training goal path. So it's meant to be a guideline. It doesn't mean that if someone's not on that goal path, you can't use that particular milestone, but it just gives practitioners an idea of the types of tasks that somebody would do along these different goal paths. Um, the example tasks are also meant to really support or illustrate how the framework does support all learners across all goal paths. And it's obviously not a comprehensive or exhaustive list. It's just meant to give examples. Some of the examples really actually quite closely align with some of the milestones that have been developed over time. But this is another snapshot where you can get a sense of the type of tasks a learner would do within this competency, within this task group at this particular level. So this is again the page to summarize. It's just the page labeled with all the different components. The competencies represent the full range of skills, knowledge, and behavior addressed in the LBS program. So those 6 competencies. The task groups organize the content within that larger competency when necessary. Not all of them have task groups, as I pointed out when we walk through them. Task groups have no implied hierarchy, so practitioners can teach or select from one task group in any order. It's really about what the learner is there to be able to learn. 3 of the 6 competencies have task groups, the other 3 don't. The indicators are meant to describe achievement at the end of each level, and they present a snapshot of programming focus for that level. The descriptors detail the qualities of tasks and learner performance at each level. They're meant to work in combination with each other to foster an understanding of what the task complexity is at that level within that particular task group. Descriptors are typically unique to a level, but sometimes they apply to more than one level. Performance descriptors are observable characteristics of learner performance, and task descriptors are the qualities of the tasks. Competencies E, manage learning, and F, engage with others, only have performance descriptors. So you aren't looking at the task descriptors and performance descriptors in combination because there are only performance descriptors, but you are still looking at all the performance descriptors in combination with each other within those particular task groups when you're looking at where something aligns with the framework. The example tasks really illustrate what learners can do at the end of a level. They also indicate the goal paths where learners are likely going to perform similar tasks once they leave. But again, that's not a science, and sometimes those things cross over a little bit. So that is an overview, a broad overview of and refresher of the curriculum framework, how it's structured, what's included, and hopefully a little bit about how to start using it as you're doing some development. I'm going to turn it over to Barb now, and she's going to focus on a bit of an overview on complexity. And again, this is really just an overview, and uh, Jane Tour will delve much more deeply into this concept in the task-based training, but we wanted to prepare people for that and give you a little bit of a foundation before you do that training. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Barb.
Great, thank you, Robin. I'm wondering maybe if this would be a good time to take our break now instead of after this section, because we are about halfway through in terms of time and the presentation. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great to me. So we did have a break planned at a certain point. There's a break slide. We'll ignore it when we get to it. So let's take a, is a 5-minute break enough for everybody? It's about 10:20. It's about 10:23. So let's come back at 10:30.
That sounds good. Okay, we'll see you at 10:30.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. It's 10:31, so we'll get started again. Robin's just pressed the record button to get us going again as well. So when we left off before the break, and again, I'm just going to open up my chat again just to follow along. So we've looked at the large context of the OALCF. We've looked at the curriculum framework itself with the 6 competencies that Robin walked us through, and then the competencies further broken down into specific task groups. We stressed that it is not a curriculum, it's a competency-based framework to which curriculum can be mapped or associated. There's no expectation that a learner is going to work through all the competencies and all of the task groups. We run learner-centered programming here, so we help the learner to determine what it is they need to work on to move toward their goals. So we'll talk a little bit more in the next few minutes and the next few slides about the notion of complexity. And complexity really just means literally how complex or complicated, or how many different parameters there are to a specific task. And so when we're talking about competency levels in the OALCF, we can associate them generally with the original essential skills levels as well. Back in the late 1980s, the federal government of Canada created the Essential Skills Framework, which consisted of a number of skills and 5 levels of complexity, from easier to harder, going up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when the OALCF was developed, it was meant to not be identical to the Essential Skills Framework, but to be similar to or derived from that federal Essential Skills Framework. So that's kind of where the origins of the OALCF are situated. We know now that that original Essential Skills Framework that was developed by the federal government has been updated and replaced by the new Skills for Success Framework. It's a little bit different than the original Essential Skills Framework, but we won't, when we're referring today to the Essential Skills Framework, it is that original one, because that is the one associated with the OALCF. Certainly in the new Skills for Success Framework, there are many similarities, but the kind of rating scales and complexity around the new skills for success haven't been well established yet. So for the purposes of our work in LBS right now, we look at the OALCF levels 1, 2, 3 to be similar to the essential skills levels 1, 2, and 3. And that second bullet on this slide that says that the OALCF levels are informed by the same factors that drive complexity at essential skills levels 1, 2, and 3 is really just in a nutshell what I said in my little opening here a few minutes ago. So not identical to, but similar to the essential skills levels. And there were originally 9 essential skills. We have 6 competencies. So again, there's not a one-to-one correspondence between those original 9 essential skills in the federal framework and our 6 OALCF competencies, but they are related. You might have also heard over the years of the IELTS study, International Adult Literacy Survey, and that was a very big international study that was conducted across many countries, and the information was synthesized and brought together to create to help inform the complexity levels that we're going to talk about today. You can look up IELTS, you can read some background information, but for the purposes today, it's really just to note that the OALCF wasn't just, a very Ontario-centric approach. It was mirrored on a much broader national and even international approach to describing literacy learning. So just to look closely at that first bullet, proficiency in each of the original essential skills is measured with a complexity rating. As I said, from 1 to 5, 1 being the least complex, the simplest type of task or skill, and then 5 being the most complex. And we'll define each of those levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in just a minute. So the complexity rating isn't just based on one little piece of a skill. It's based on different dimensions of the skill on that 4 or 5 point scale. And then what comes out is a single number that provides an overall rating for the skill that's in question. So basic tasks start at level 1, levels 2 and 3 contain more complex tasks, and levels 4 or 5 contain more advanced tasks. And then in the essential skills framework, those example tasks relate to tasks a worker would perform in a specific job. So in that essential skills framework, there's a whole lot of job profiles for various occupations in Canada, and the job profiles describe the type of tasks and the complexity level at which those tasks would needed to be done in order to be successful in many, many different occupations. So just very briefly, and to illustrate an example of the complexity in our situation, in the communicate ideas and information competency, a level 1 task might be making a to-do list or making a shopping list. So a pretty finite, short, and reasonably straightforward task. Level 2 might involve, say, writing a short letter. So a couple of paragraphs, a particular purpose and context. Communicate ideas and information task in level 3 could be something like writing a 5-paragraph essay, for example, of the students on one of the academic pathways. So just in that very brief example, just trying to illustrate the progression of sort of more basic tasks at level 1 through more complex tasks at 2, and then the increasing complexity to level 3. So any task that we're talking about using can be rated for complexity based on what's involved in doing it. And as it said in the other slide, the levels relate to the task itself, not to the learners. We assess our learners when they come in, and they may assess, for example, at level 1 in the read continuous text competency. They might assess at level 2 in understand and use numbers. So we're not saying that a learner is at a particular level. We're saying the tasks that they're able to complete those tasks are at a particular complexity level. So as we talked about just a minute ago, the ratings of the tasks in our OALCF and in the Essential Skills Framework, they look at different dimensions on a 4 or a 5-point scale. And the complexity levels that are assigned in the Essential Skills Framework are to sample tasks that would be performed by a worker in a job. We said that a moment ago. But in the OALCF, the example tasks, and you would have seen this on Robin's slide a few minutes ago, the example tasks are not just specific to workers in jobs. They're much broader than that, specific to everyday life tasks, to academic tasks, to employment tasks. So that again is the intention of the OALCF, that it's encompassing that really broad range of goals and that our learners come with and the skills that they need to learn in order to be competent to move on to their goal. So let's just take a quick look at this is the essential skills complexity levels definition. But again, our OALCF levels are informed by this particular set of definitions. So level 1 tasks are straightforward. The learners locating information and using it in a very specific way. And there's a couple of examples in this chart too. So for example, if in the job context, pet groomers read items in supply catalogs and purchasing flyers. These are employment examples because they are examples from the Essential Skills Framework. Level 2, not only does the individual have to locate information, they have to do something with it, like apply it in some way. And that's what's referred to as cycling. They may have to look back through the document more than once to get the general idea of what it is they're reading. So an example there was around kitchen helpers reading safety precautions. Level 3, which is the level where the OALCF ends in terms of our applicability to LBS. Learners would need to locate information, perhaps cycle through the document to find other information and integrate those various pieces of information. They might even be using more than one document. They might be using a textbook and they might be using an online resource at the same time. So the integration piece is what makes level 3 tasks more complex. And there's an example here of a branch manager of a bank or financial institution using several documents to determine pay scales and job descriptions. Levels 4 and 5 are not included in the OALCF. It doesn't mean that no one delivers programming that's, that might be at a level 4, but what we are, responsible for reporting back to the ministry and what is the expectation of the ministry is that we're working with learners below the end of level 3 in our LBS programming. So level 4 distinguishes that application of prior knowledge as well as locating and cycling through a document and integrating multiple documents and pieces of information. So in level 4, people are actually applying what they do in a more meaningful or deeper way. And then finally, level 5 has that word generate at the end. So level 5 would indicate that new information is being generated by the individual to either work in their job or in an academic setting. Researchers would be generating new information, for example. So the sample task under level 5 here is relates to business managers in labor unions who might read adjudication decisions, and that would inform their understanding of other grievances, for example, and how they handle it. Level 5 and often level 4 tasks have very context-based vocabulary that you wouldn't necessarily see anywhere else. That's also what makes them more complex. Robin, do you have anything to add to that, the overview of the complexity ES?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a great overview. You might sometimes see a little bit of applying, for example, you might see a little bit of the language in level 4 in our level 3, like the use of prior knowledge, but it's still not as complex as what it would be at essential skills level 4. So you're going to see, again, ours is based on and linked to definitely the essential skills, but because our context is so much broader beyond employment, it's not a direct match even to this particular scale. So it's important to remember that. We're just using this so that people understand the foundation of where the OALCF kind of started, and then really went beyond the scope of essential skills, which was very related to employment.
Great. Thanks for that too, Robin. I think we can go to the next slide now. So once again, here's just a slightly more detailed definition of those terms that were on the previous slide: locate, cycle, integrate, synthesize prior knowledge, and generate. And if we just take a moment, I'm just going to give you a minute to read through those. I'm not going to read them out loud, and then we'll come back together in a second. So just focusing again on levels 1, 2, and 3 in that description. When you see the definitions written that way, it just further illustrates that progression from level 1 tasks being fairly simple, level 2 tasks being a little more complex, and then level 3 tasks having a fairly significant degree of complexity to them. I wanted just to point out in the level 2 definition that concept of distractors, because it's a really important one. That's the notion, of putting information into a task or into a set of instructions that are actually probably irrelevant to the task itself, because part of what level 2 is trying to address and assess is, can the individual performing the task sort through the information and find what's relevant and disregard those distractors or irrelevant pieces of information. And it's not that they're incorrect, they're just not necessarily related to the task. So, it's as you are developing in this project, if you are working on the development project, is you're developing milestones and culminating tasks, that concept of distractors is important to keep in mind as you're trying to distinguish between what's a level 1 and a level 2. And then, of course, level 3 has that, working with longer documents, more complex information, integrating information from various sources at the same time to produce whatever the outcome of the task is, whether it's producing a piece of writing, whether it's doing some research, whether it's performing, calculating various numeracy and math tasks and so on. But level 3 tasks do typically involve a number of steps to complete the task. That's also what makes them more complex. So any questions about that information so far? I'm not seeing any in the chat. We know we're loading a lot of information on you today. It's partly why we're going back and forth, just to change the speaker, and also trying to just organize this within a presentation in a way that you could come back to it later and walk through it again on your own if you're interested in doing that. Okay, so let's go on here, and just as we get closer to my turning things back to Robin. So the OALCF is only applicable to LBS programs in Ontario. People outside of LBS would not have heard of or used the OALCF. So it doesn't carry itself in any way outside of LBS, but it is what we use within LBS programs. Those previous few slides about the essential skills, as Robin said, are just trying to anchor some of the background of where the OALCF came from, and that it wasn't, just something that somebody thought of in the ministry 14 or 15 years ago, that it was anchored back in the original approach to the essential skills framework from the federal government and the complexity levels associated with it. So that orange box that says the OALCF is informed by factors that drive complexity at essential skills levels 1, 2, 3 is really saying it's not identical to the essential skills levels, but the OALCF is similar, mirrored on, informed by those factors that relate to the complexity of the essential skill levels 1, 2, and 3. The OALCF differs from the essential skills framework because the essential skills framework primarily relates to tasks performed by employees in specific jobs, whereas the OALCF has much broader application, and we've said that a couple of times, to not just work, but to life, learning, and work. And then finally, the OALCF does have the task and performance descriptors within each of the task groups and levels. So it goes a little bit of a step further in addition to what's drawn from the essential skills levels to inform the complexity. Okay, still not seeing any questions in the chat. This is where we were going to take a 5-minute break, but since we just took our break, I don't not seeing any questions. I will now pass things over to Robin for what I think is the final section of the presentation.
It is. So thanks, Barb. And what I'm going to talk about now are a little more specifically about milestones and culminating tasks. Just an overview of both of those types of tools that have been developed as part of the OALCF. So milestones are assessment activities, and they're tied to specific goal paths, which I alluded to when I was talking about the example tasks, which look a lot like milestones. They involve using real world documents as much as possible, text, situations, and interactions. So the idea is that a milestone is meant to, as much as possible, be on an authentic task that you would do when you leave a program. Having said that, that's not always 100% feasible because they are primarily paper-based. But it's meant to try to mirror or mimic that real world task. Each milestone, and this is important for development, every milestone corresponds directly to a competency, a task group, or a level within the curriculum framework. So they're very finite. They're meant to provide an assessment for a very finite component within the curriculum framework. Successful completion of milestones is meant to demonstrate the learner's skills in achieving goal-related tasks. What they don't do, like completing a milestone, doesn't mean they're proficient in other tasks at that same level or task group. They're really meant to serve as progress indicators, but they don't stand alone. They complement other assessment methods that are happening within a program. Milestones are tied to performance management. We know that because that is one of the things that does feed into performance management. So service delivery agencies are looking to have 60% of their learners either complete a milestone or have an in progress milestone within a fiscal year. So that's important. That's one of the reasons why the ministry is spending additional funds on developing more milestones and culminating tasks, because those two assessment tools are tied to performance. And it's impossible to have a milestone for every single solitary thing that a learner might do. But being able to develop more means there's a wider range to select from. They're really meant to give a tangible way for learners to showcase that they're learning. And I think that's important in their delivery to consider. They're really stepping stones or ways for a learner to show that they are making progress in small increments. But they're just one piece of the pie. And really, you're looking for a holistic assessment approach within a program to monitor overall progress for a learner. So This slide just includes a couple of quotes from some training that was developed many years ago by Community Literacy of Ontario, and just kind of summarizes what I just said. These two statements are also important because they remind us that milestones are only one method of assessment and that learners are not expected to complete every milestone. And Barb talked about this earlier. Their learners aren't expected to progress through the framework. They're only expected to come to program and to focus on whatever it is they're there for, what their goal is, and transition hopefully on the next step towards that goal that they've identified. So the milestones are selected to support what the learner is doing in the program. Adding to this complement of milestones that we currently have is going to increase the chance that an appropriate milestone does exist for the learners in the programs. Milestones are aligned to the competencies and complexity levels found in the curriculum framework, and they're meant to be standard indicators of learner progress towards completion of the goal path. That's why they're kept in a somewhat, not really that secure, but somewhat secure repository. They're not meant to be distributed widely. They're meant to be downloaded and administered. And then they're meant to be kept in the learner file um, securely because we don't want to have to continuously develop new ones. So that's why there's some of those parameters put in place around controlling the use and distribution of milestones. Milestones are specifically developed for the program. There's a finite set of them. We're adding to that finite set. They're not something that a practitioner goes out and develops themselves on their own and just administers. They're tied to performance management. They're all listed within EOIS CAMS. So when somebody completes a milestone, it's a specific milestone, and that milestone is recorded in CAMS. Overall, milestones are meant to answer the question, can learners apply the skills they're developing within the program to purposeful tasks? And it gives learners the opportunity to actually showcase the fact that they're learning those skills. We have 22 of the original 60 milestones were adapted to allow for face-to-face administration. And they are identified in the milestone index with the use of an A next to the milestone number in that file. They're intended to support learners with limited reading skills, and both the original and adapted versions assess abilities at the same level. So because those particular milestones aren't assessing reading, they are assessing something else, and a learner has to read in order to complete it, because as we know, competencies cross. To make them to allow practitioners to just assess the particular skill that's being assessed, some of the milestones were adapted so that the practitioner could support the learner by, for example, reading the instructions to them. And that's kind of the origin of the adapted milestones. If you're considering using those adapted ones, you should look at both versions to see which one would better suit that particular learner. So these are the ones that have been adapted of the original 60 that were developed prior to 2021 when we developed more of them. Currently, there are 90 milestones available and the 22 original adapted milestones. Each milestone corresponds to one indicator within a task group and a competency within the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework. Over the years, one of the challenges that practitioners have found with milestones, particularly level 1 milestones, is that many learners are not able to complete a level 1 milestone for a long time, if ever, because the milestones traditionally have been meant to represent the end of the level, so the end of level 1. To accommodate this in this particular round of development, the different organizations do have the ability to develop a milestone that is within level one. And I haven't put a slide in about this because it's a new concept. But the idea is to add to the complement of milestones that we have so that learners are able to show progress. Level one is huge. And if you look at the research and look at the IELTS scale and the correspondence to IELTS and essential skills level one, IELTS is a 500-point scale and level one is a lot of that scale. So what we've done, and I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation where this information is we've, as a draft, taken all of the level one task groups. So for each task group where there is, or each competency with task group that is leveled, we have taken level one and we've done a draft breakdown so that there's a level 1A and a level 1B. So essentially breaking that down into two different levels to try to facilitate your ability to be able to develop some mid-level one milestones this time. Okay, there is a question. How are these adaptive milestones identified within the milestone description? Is the word adapted use on the milestone? They have a -A, Claudia, in the actual milestone number. So it's on the milestone itself as well. So it will be milestone 1-A, for example. There are also some milestones that have been adopted specifically for the deaf stream, and those are identified with a -D. And the milestone handbook actually tells you that. So that's how those are identified. Hopefully that answered your question. Great. So that's just a little bit about milestones.
And Brandy
Um,
has a question as well, or was that
oh,
Brandy's question?
sorry, I missed.
No, hi, thank you for pausing. This is in terms of, my question is in terms of like applying the milestones and culminating tasks at the program level. Do learners get to like choose their tasks by any chance? Like could an LBS instructor offer them, say, okay, you can do this one, or this one? And then the learner can choose which one they think best suits their, abilities, or which one they'd like to go for. And second, are instructors allowed to support the learners when they're completing these tasks? I'm not exactly sure how they're delivered, but just wondering if they're allowed to support while they're doing them. I know that some of the instructors in my programs have said they're not allowed to help with assessments or intake questionnaires or anything like that. So that's kind of where that's coming from.
Okay, I'm going to answer question 2 first, Brandy, and then I'm going to ask you to reiterate question 1. So with respect to supporting learners, the milestones and the culminating tasks have very specific instructions, the templates, and they are meant to be assessment tools. So the ability to support a learner, that the supports that are allowed are outlined. To a large extent, the answer would be no. They wouldn't be completing an assessment tool until they're ready to do that unsupported, with the exception mostly of the adopted milestones. And because that would then become a learning activity as opposed to an assessment activity. So I hope that answers that question. Can you reiterate question 1 again? Sorry, I lost you because I started listening to question 2.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So thanks for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense, distinguishing between a learning activity and a task. Sorry, a milestone or culminating task. So my question is, do learners get to choose? Like, do they have any choice or say, like, when they're working with their practitioner, are they allowed to offer them choices between milestones and tasks, or how does that process work?
Okay, so the milestones are part of the learner plan that's developed, and the learner plan is supposed to be developed as a discussion between the learner and the practitioner. So the learner and the practitioner are meant to choose those milestones together that make sense for the learner. So the short answer is yes. The learner should be involved in that discussion. The culminating tasks, it would depend on the learner's transition point, and there might not be more than one culminating task that's available. But again, we'll talk about this, but not every learner is going to do a culminating task, even if we make 20 more culminating tasks, because there is an infinite number of transition points. And although culminating tasks will become part of completions and performance management, the ministry's goal is to have a wider range of them available so that they can establish some goals around completions and culminating task completion based on having access to more of those tools. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Robin, can I just add one thing to your
Yeah.
response as well? So Brandy, with reference to can and do learners choose milestones, exactly as Robin said, it can be a time-consuming process. So there are examples where maybe that wouldn't happen so much. And that would be more where there would be, for example, a targeted training or a short-term training with a group of learners, say, all doing the same thing at the same time. And then normally the practitioner would choose the milestones that would be associated with that short-term training. Let's say you're delivering a customer service, short-term targeted training, or you're delivering retail sales or carpentry prep or something. That would be unlikely there that learners would be choosing milestones with the practitioner because they would have been set out at the beginning of that, in the development of that training. And it's also very time consuming. So in larger programs, sometimes it's a little more difficult for a practitioner to sit with a learner and specifically select milestones, but it certainly can be done. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
And the other thing, we're not really getting into program delivery during this presentation because we're really just trying to set the foundations for this development work that's happening this year. But when you look at the training that's available around just program delivery, an important concept with the administration of milestones and culminating tasks is that a practitioner would never have somebody attempt a milestone unless they're pretty darn sure that they're going to be successful. You want to make sure that they have all of the skills, knowledge, the competencies in place before they attempt that assessment. That's really important. So it shouldn't really be a surprise to the learner what they're going to be doing. I mean, you're not showing it to them ahead of time necessarily, but they've done a number of similar tasks prior to attempting a milestone. So there's some familiarity there for the most part. Okay. I did not mean to do that. Oops, sorry. I hit my mouse by accident in my excitement of explaining that. I'm going to talk a little bit about culminating tasks now, give you a broad overview of culminating tasks. So culminating task differs from a milestone because it's more complex. It's also aligned to the OALCF, and it's meant to reflect something a learner may perform when they exit the LBS program. So there's a lot of parallels, but also there's differences in the two types of assessments. So milestones are very finite. Culminating tasks are a lot more complex. They involve a lot more than what a milestone would involve. So they're complex. They incorporate multiple competencies and task groups. Multiple means 2 or more though, so keep that in mind. It doesn't mean they have to incorporate all 6, but they do definitely incorporate usually more than one competency and task group. They're meant to allow learners to apply their skills and knowledge across competencies in a way that's going to reflect a real life situation that they're going to encounter when they leave the program, when they transition. So they're meant to, and this is a bit of a misnomer because they're meant to represent the end point of a goal path. The challenge in LBS is that we have 5 goal paths, arguably 6 if you break apprenticeship down into 2 at the moment. And the end point of a goal path isn't a finite thing because a goal path is so broad and there's so many different endpoints for every goal path. Hence the challenge of having culminating tasks that represent all of their endpoints. We will never have that full range. And also things change over time in terms of what the endpoint of a transition point is in different goal paths, because all of those goal paths also change over time. Again, what we're trying to do here is just add to the complement of tools that are currently available, so that there's a better chance that there's an appropriate culminating task. But again, not all learners will do a culminating task, and we don't have targets yet for that. That's something that's going to happen over the next year or 2, probably longer, to establish those. But they are definitely tied to performance management and will be a component of that when the system becomes fully mature, which it still isn't. Successful completion of a culminating task is also just one way for learners to demonstrate that they may be ready to transition outside of LBS, whether it be to independence, employment, secondary school credit, apprenticeship / skills training, or post-secondary. Really important. This is probably one of the important things to remember. Culminating tasks are, again, specific to literacy and basic skills. They don't have meaning outside of our program. They have meaning within our program, but they don't really have meaning outside of our program because they're not a credential or a certification. And also, they don't replace any credentials, courses, or certifications that learners might need to access to actually reach their goal or their destination in the end. So again, they're just they're one piece to show that somebody can do something more complex than a milestone that represents something that they're going to do as they transition out of the program, but they don't replace anything that they might need that is a credential, course, or certification. There are many other elements involved in transition readiness, including, and this is not an exhaustive or comprehensive list, but sometimes in order for people to move on, they might actually need to complete a required academic course or a credential. They might have industry credentials they need to complete. There's other factors that you have to consider too in transition readiness outside of just a culminating task, and that's their stability um, around just life in general, and also the motivation and persistence of the learner. So I guess the important thing to remember is that, again, a culminating task is part of our system. Um, it's it's something that's an expectation of the system within which we're working. It's something that's meant to show transition or help show transition readiness, but it's not the only part that shows transition readiness. Barb, did you want to jump in with anything here around the credentials or that? Just give you an opportunity.
No, I think that was a good summary. And again, to reiterate Robin's point that it's not appropriate for every learner to do a culminating task. There's been, not a lot of learners over the years and programs have ever completed a culminating task, partly because there weren't very many to choose from, and because they're just not always at a point when they leave the program that it's appropriate for them to do one. So maybe the only thing I would just add here, Robin, is that there is a user guide for the culminating tasks and there is a user guide for the milestones. Those have both been updated recently, and the user guide for the milestones is on the portal where the milestones are located. The new culminating task user guide will soon be posted there as well. So this had not been updated since the originals in 2011-12. So now both of those guides have been updated, and, you know, worth, especially if you're a little bit newer to LBS programming, worth having a look at both of those guides as another way to learn a little bit more about what and how and why the milestones and culminating tasks are used. That's all.
Thank you. So this is just a quote that is often appears, and it's just that successful completion of the culminating task is meant to help answer the question that the learner might ask of themselves. Do I have a reasonable chance of managing the next step in my life, learning, work? And can I transition successfully to that next step? So it's helping to answer that question, but it's not the only piece of evidence that shows that a learner is ready to transition. So the culminating tasks are representative of the 5 goal paths in the OALCF. And successful completion is one way for learners to demonstrate that they may be ready to transition. Through this project, support organizations will be adding to that complement of culminating tasks to support transitions that are not currently represented in the 51 culminating tasks we have. This page doesn't actually this page actually represents the original 18, not all of the 51. There were lots developed in 2021, 2022, and several more will be developed this year. I will show you where you can get a comprehensive list of the culminating tasks that currently exist in a moment. So the culminating tasks for a learner's goal path is really meant to bring together the elements of the learner plan. And I talked a little bit about that a minute ago when I was answering a question. So every learner in LBS is expected to have a learner plan in place. The learner plan involves a number of different components. Some of it is written down into a formal plan. Other components are just part of what happens on an ongoing basis. So, you know, there's the daily activities, the tasks that the learners are performing every day, the building blocks, the skill building blocks, even for more complex activities. So the foundational things that are happening in programming every day. These are your small steps, the bottom of the staircase, so to speak. The tasks that they perform in the task-based activities often involve job-related or skill-based tasks, and they're meant to bridge the gap between the day-to-day activities and skill-building things that learners are doing, and more integrated challenges. They're kind of your intermediate steps on that staircase and the ones that propel learners upwards. Integrated tasks, we don't talk a lot about integrated tasks, but they are a concept that is kind of built in, and they combine multiple skills and knowledge areas. They might simulate real world experiences. So they're places for people to really pause, assess, and adapt and start to integrate all the different things that they're learning. The milestones along the way are meant to mark achievement. They validate progress and they demonstrate competence. They're like checkpoints along the way for the learners to actually celebrate that they're making progress. They're also tied to performance management, and that's one of the things that we track in EOIS camps. Finally, the culminating tasks, they're like the pinnacle. If somebody is going to do one, if there's one available that makes sense and that supports the learning that they've done and supports the transition to their next goal. And it is a more comprehensive challenge that it integrates many different elements. And it's kind of like the top of the staircase in this visual. So this is just meant to kind of give an overarching graphic organizer for the different components that happen within the learner's learning plan along the journey. And another way to look at it, so within the actual development, just being more specific about the goal that the learner has, and then the 2 assessment tools that are part of the OALCF specifically. Again, remember, there are 2 tools that we use, but there are all sorts of other ways that we assess learners on an ongoing basis. This is just meant to show that typically a learner might do a few milestones. This doesn't mean they do 3. It's just a representation of that. Once they've gotten to a certain point and they're ready to transition, if it makes sense and there is a culminating task that supports their goal, they might complete that culminating task and then transition to their goal. So that kind of completes the bulk of the information that we were going to share today. I have a slide called More Information in this presentation. And one thing that I'd like to do, again, the presentation was uploaded. You can download it from the chat. It will also be on the website, so that you can access it from there going forward. I'm going to take you right now on a little bit of a web safari to the website where we'll be storing all the information related to this project. And then we'll come back after that and we can answer some additional questions if anybody has them, if that makes sense. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second here so I can find my other screen to share. Just give me a second here. Just need a little tech break here while I reorganize myself. Okay. Hey, can everybody see my screen? Just going to go back to the first page of the website.
Yep, we're good, Robin.
You're good. Okay, so this is the website. This website existed prior to this project. We used it to house all the information when we did this similar work in 2021, 2022. So I've just repurposed this website because a lot of the information is similar or the same. But this is your go-to place if you're doing development work on milestones and culminating tasks. So essentially it gives you an overview. There is a calendar which will give you information about the training that is happening. There's a page on here, and what it gives you is a high level work plan. It has dates in it right now. These dates are changing depending on what's happening. We're still working out timelines with all the different organizations that are working on this and the ministry. It's so that the timelines on this are a bit of a moving target, but it gives you kind of an overview of the process that's happening and where we're at in that process. In addition, there's a document where all the organizations working on this project are actually adding the deliverables that they're going to be doing. So whether they're doing milestones or culminating tasks and how many that they're doing. I'm just trying to get a count at the moment. Later on, I will be putting together some tracking documents so that all the organizations, for example, that are working on culminating tasks will be able to slot them into the tracking document so that we can see what everybody's working on, to try to avoid as much as possible duplication or overlap. This worked really well last time, so we'll do that again, and we'll do something similar with the milestone development. The focus is more on the development of culminating tasks in this round. There's a lot more resources being directed towards that. So the milestone piece is a little smaller in terms of the number of tools that are being developed. There is a page for meetings. So the program development meetings are all listed on this document. They're all orange. So those are meetings related specifically to this particular project. In addition, this year, there are community of practices that are continuing from the Skills for Success initiative from the last 2 years. They're similar, but in some cases slightly different. So to make it easier, this is a comprehensive list of all of the meetings that are happening. Not everybody will be involved in all of those meetings, but just so that you're aware of them. I'm coordinating the milestone culminating task piece the community of practices are being led by other people, but we're trying to keep all the information in one place. So any of the community of practices that are running, if the leads share the information from those meetings, I will actually be posting it on this website as well, just to make it easier for people, kind of a one-stop shop. In terms of the training, the full training schedule with all the links is here. If people are still have to register for training, I would encourage you to do it off of this document. We've been having some problems with some of the links. There are 3 types of training being offered. The training we offer today, which is the overview training related to the OALCF, and then the culminating tasks and milestones. We're also offering a more in-depth task-based training. So that's really around the development of how you develop the tasks that are part of your task sets in your milestones and your culminating tasks. And we're also offering a round of clear writing training, and that training is more generic, but I think important for people to have a grounding in clear writing. Um, each of the sessions is being offered 3 times. We did it the first 2 weeks of July, and then we're repeating the training again in September in case people weren't available over the summer. Developers who are working on the projects should really only register for 1 session per topic, just to make sure everybody has access. I don't think we're going to have a lot of problems, but we just want to make sure. One of the important things about the training is that basically we're repeating the training that we delivered last time. So all of the archive training is still on the website if you want to access it, for both the overview training and the task-based training. The clear writing training archive is not live yet because I need to talk to the developer about that before I make that live. So if you're looking for stuff from the last time we did this project because you're familiar or you want to access older recordings of basically the same material, they are in the archive section. I'm not going to go through that. You can look at it at your own leisure. In addition to the training, we've set up 2 sessions called developer drop-in Q&A sessions. You don't have to register for these. We're offering them twice. All the people delivering the training will be at these sessions. They're really meant as a check-in as people are working through this. Some people actually might be done by them, but as people are working through this, if they want to drop in and ask questions of any of the trainers or of each other, this is an opportunity to do this. So it's just some open sessions that you can drop into should you choose to do that. They'll be 90 minutes in length, and you can just join the Zoom meeting if you want to come to those. There is a page called Culminating Task Development Materials, and there's also one called Milestone Development Materials. So one thing you're going to find on this is the current full list of culminating tasks, the index. And there's also information about how to get access to the repository where all the actual documents are located. There's some restrictions over who can have access, but if you're working on development, you should be able to get access to it. In addition, we have some guidance documents and other documents to support development. We developed these in 2021, 2022. I have reposted them here, so they are available to everybody. I'm going to do some minor review and tweaking of them to see if they need any updates. I just literally haven't had time to get that. This will be done over the summer. But you can access these documents now because they basically give you, they're not going to change significantly, I guess is the point. So there's the guidance document, there's the reprint, there's a form here, and you'll learn a little bit more about this during the task-based training. But if you're using authentic documents from an actual place, so if you get a form from, say, I don't know, for example, a car dealership, and you're going to use that to build your milestone, or you're going to integrate that into your culminating task, you need to get this form filled out so that we know that we have permission to use it going forward. Some people just develop something completely independently too. There's templates for development. So there's templates for the actual culminating tasks. The culminating tasks are set up as they have a learner version and a practitioner version. We aren't going to modify the format of the tools themselves because the format exists. So we're not revamping the format, and we are asking people to use the templates that are provided, or set your document up so it looks like the template. After they are collected in, we have to go through a process of vetting, which means that somebody who is highly skilled at leveling tasks will actually review the tools as they come in and make sure that they do represent the levels that they are saying they represent. We have somebody who will be editing the documents, and then we also will be desktop publishing them, aka making them look like the other tools that already exist. So the template follows those formats. So that's why we're asking you to use those templates. For milestone development materials, again, we've put up the most current list of milestones, English version. The French version hasn't been translated yet, sorry. They can also be found within the repository. Something new that actually I just added this to the website this morning. We've done some work, and I did say this during the presentation. One of the challenges with milestones, again, has been that challenge of always having to do a milestone at the end of level 1. And the ministry has been amenable to developing milestones that actually fall within level 1. So to help facilitate that, we've taken all of the level 1 task groups and broken them down into 2 levels. So there's basically a mid-ish level and then the end of level. So it's taking the framework information and breaking it down a little bit. They're drafts, they haven't been field tested. So they're really just meant to be guidance for those people who are developing mid-level or milestones within level 1. This is for milestones only, not for culminating tasks, because culminating tasks are more complex tasks, and they're definitely meant to support end of level. They're all in this Google Drive. So there's a link here. You can access those documents. Again, they're drafts. They say draft, but they're working documents that the developers can work with. Finally,
Robin, I'm going to interrupt. There's just a couple of questions in the chat.
Sorry. Okay. Okay.
That's asking if the templates are also available in French.
Okay, I'm just
I
scrolling
think she's
down.
referring to the milestone and the milestone and culminating task templates.
Yeah, so most of the stuff was translated last time into French. There are a few exceptions. If you're working in both languages, if the template doesn't exist in French, but you're doing both, I would ask you to follow the same format. You have access to all of the current culminating tasks. They all follow the format. So that's my kind of not great answer to the first one. The second one, if a nonprofit, for example, posts on social media an image that we might use as part of a milestone because it's already in the public domain, do we still need permission to use? I don't know the answer to that question, Joe. I would err on the side of caution and try to get permission to use it. We didn't have a lot of, there were some authentic documents used last time. A lot of times what people will do is recreate an example of an authentic document. So I would always err on the side of trying to get permission to reuse something that someone else has created. Claudia, regarding on website that there are 2 levels, level 1B and 1B. Is that just
That was earlier. I just thought maybe you meant 1A and 1B. I don't know.
I probably did. It's probably a typo because I was doing
I just wanted to I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't sure.
Oh, yeah, that's a typo because I was literally doing this 1 second before the webinar started. Because this is all working.
Totally understand. And
Yep.
I do have a question though, and
Okay.
it might be off topic. And if it is, has there been any discussion on how AI interacts with these
Mhm.
milestones and culminating tasks at all? Because my understanding right now is that some students use the chat GPT
Chat
or
GPT.
something like that. Yeah, I just don't know whether it's going to affect whether our competencies in digital technology, or if there's been any discussion now with you know, with milestones and culminating tasks. If that's going to become, I don't know what permissions people are having now in high school to use it. I know that I was talking to a high school teacher and she was saying that um, they can use it, but it's not as there's some co- complications with it. So I don't know what the permissions are, in high school, but it seems that the kids are using more digital technology. So just thinking of secondary goal paths.
So, the milestones and culminating tasks that we're creating are still paper-based, with the exception of eChannel, who have permission from the ministry to create their own, create or adapt their own milestones and culminating tasks that are used within their own platforms. So they're very controlled. Um, Within the LBS program, the basic expectation is that you're using still the paper-based um, tools. Many people did many things during the COVID years to try to do the best they could do. The ministry isn't delving into that whole digital, digital for face-to-face programs right now. They did clarify that in the first program development meeting. So it's obviously an ongoing question. They are assessments that we're talking about, the milestones and culminating tasks. So there are parameters around administering assessments. A learner wouldn't typically have access to, it says what they can have access to within the instructions, right? So they probably shouldn't have access to a computer and use Chat GPT to try to generate answers when it's an assessment, unless that's specifically what they're doing as the assessment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wondered because they're right now in high school, this is the tension that they're having there. So, okay, thank you.
Yep, no worries.
And
But it's a
if I
great
might
question.
jump in here, Robin, for a second.
Yep.
Yeah, it is a great question. And the tension absolutely exists in lots of adult education programs too, because it's hard to control. But as Robin pointed out, the milestones and culminating tasks are designed to be in a controlled environment, and it's up to the the practitioner or the person supervising the task to make sure that that happens. And if, say, the milestone or the culminating task, particularly the milestone, involves using a digital device, then the practitioner has to monitor that in such a way that they can't access, to use the informal term, cheating, ways of cheating or plagiarizing through Chat GPT or anything else on the internet.
Okay. Thank you. That really helps. I know it is a tension in high schools right now. So thank you so
In
much.
post-secondary, everywhere,
Yeah.
it's lots of great things that AI can do, but it's certainly pretty easy to generate things that replace using your own thinking
Brain.
skills.
Exactly. No, I know. My son was doing something and he says, "Oh, I just went to Chat GPT and I put in my thing and it made it sound so much better." And I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is the times that we're living in, right?" So
Yeah, and
okay.
educators are having to spend a lot of time and energy in trying to mitigate those things. Brandy, you have a question.
Thank you. So back to when you said digital device, if they need to use a digital device for part of their assessment, is that something, given that they're paper-based, is that something that they can do? So for example, like logging, I don't know if this makes sense, but logging a timesheet online, like filling out their timesheet online, as part of the task, is that something that's doable, or just keep it paper-based completely?
I'm not answering you, I'm thinking. So primarily what you're gonna want to focus on is try to develop things that can be done in a controlled environment. Um, in order for them to be able to log into something that's online, that would then have to be accessible to everybody across the province in some way, shape, or form. It's really complex, and we don't have like a platform where we can actually administer that stuff. That's kind of the pie in the sky hope for the future. So that isn't necessarily the best route to go because it's not controllable or accessible to everybody.
Okay,
And
makes sense.
the focus is, and within with digital, what we're talking about, some of the milestones themselves are about interacting with a digital device. So they require a device to be able to complete the milestone in a controlled environment with typically the practitioner observing what they're doing.
Okay, okay, thank
Okay.
you.
It's a little tricky. Okay, so Sylvie, I see your question. There is a template for the milestones developed that was translated into French because last time that was what the organizations developed. The culminating task template hasn't been translated into French. I can inquire from the ministry if that's needed. I need to get a sense of what everybody is specifically doing first. The format is basically just the same format as what a culminating task would appear already in the French. So we can maybe talk about the needs offline. Most of the documentation has been translated in terms of the guide for developing and that type of thing. And then the training decks, we're using the same training. They were also translated last time as well. Okay, I'm just gonna continue okay, you're welcome. I'm gonna continue to walk through just what's on the website. So the other main component or information that will be kind of ongoing. I started a question and answer page. I did that because sometimes somebody asks me a question independently. And if I think it has applicability across more than one organization, I'll put the question and the answer on this document so that people can maybe look at it and see if they have a question. It might have already been answered. In addition, I will probably develop some updaters as time goes on, a couple through the year, just to give a snapshot of what's happened, where you can find things, what's going to happen next. Those will be posted on the website. I'll also email them out to the contacts I have for the support organizations that are involved. I haven't done an updater yet because we just started, but I probably will do one pretty soon. And I'll also post these on the site. Another page you will find on this site is what I call background reading. Essentially, this is all of the ministry documentation that exists to support I'm gonna I see a question in there. Just let me finish this and I'll answer the question. So this is all the ministry documentation. It's actually all on EOPG. I put it on here though, because sometimes it's hard to find everything. So the French and the English versions of all that documentation is on here. It doesn't mean that you have to read all of this. It just means that it's here for you to access if you feel like it would be useful as you're working on development. So that is all there for people if they want to look at it. Jeanette just said in the French guide, the part 2 on culminating task is in English. And yeah, I noticed that if you keep scrolling, the part 2 is actually in French underneath that. That's just the way the document came back probably after translation last time. And I didn't notice it. So I think if you keep scrolling, the rest of it's in French underneath. I need to double check. As I said, that documentation is all from last time, and I have to double check all of that documentation. I just wanted it to be accessible to people right away in case they were wanting to get started. But I have to double check it all. But I did notice that when I was scrolling through that last night, Jeanette, and I think what happened is when they translated it, they didn't delete the English part out of it. Okay, yeah, the documents are whatever I got back from translation, so I'll take a look at them and see. It's actually the same document. Milestones and culminating tasks are all in one document, so. Okay, so that's basically the website. I just wanted people to know it was available and know it's going to be updated on a continuous basis. And it's just meant to be a place to house everything so that I'm not constantly sending emails out to people. And it's a little easier, I think, to find things on a website than it is just to put it all on a Google Drive. This is all on a Google Drive, but it's sometimes hard to find those documents when they're just in a series of folders. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing this for now. And I am going to back to the presentation. And actually, I've lost all my controls now somehow. I'm just going to come back to here and we're going to wrap up and just make sure that there aren't any other questions before we kind of wrap up for the day. We planned for 3 hours. We knew it wouldn't be a full 3 hours, but we wanted to make sure we had time in case there were questions as we went through the presentation. So does anybody else have any questions before we wrap up for the day? Oh, thanks, Barb.
No problem.
My stuff got lost in the screens.
It's okay. So just on the website there, or sorry, on the screen share right now, once again, there's a link to the website. There's Robin's email, my email. You're welcome to contact one or both of us if you have follow-up questions, and we'll be happy to respond.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. And we do hope it was helpful. And again, yeah, we're always available for questions.
So have a great rest of your day and week, and enjoy the summer if we're not talking to you again right away.